I had been looking forward to this camping trip with my best friend Alex for months. We both needed a break from the city, and the idea of a remote area with mountains, a lake, and a forest sounded like the perfect escape. We had never been to this particular area before, but we were excited to explore the unfamiliar terrain. As we arrived at our destination, the beauty of the landscape took our breath away. Majestic mountains with snow-capped peaks loomed in the distance, creating an awe-inspiring backdrop. The dense, lush forest that surrounded us. The thick canopy of trees filtered the sunlight, casting a gentle green glow on the forest floor. Wildflowers and ferns sprouted between the gnarled roots of ancient trees, and the air was alive with the sound of birdsong and the rustling of leaves. We followed a narrow, winding dirt path that led us to the lake. Its surface shimmered under the sun, reflecting the blue sky and the white, fluffy clouds overhead. The water was crystal clear, and we could see the smooth, rounded stones that lined the lake bed. The lake was nestled in a valley, and as we stood there, we felt embraced by the protective arms of the mountains that rose on either side. After taking in the scenery, we set out to find the perfect spot for our campsite. We wanted a place that was close enough to the lake for easy access to water and fishing, but also far enough from the shoreline to ensure we wouldn't be disturbed by any curious wildlife. Tucked away among the trees, the ground was soft and covered with a layer of fallen leaves, making it an ideal surface for setting of our tent. The trees around the clearing provided ample shade, shielding us from the harsh sun during the day. Nearby, a babbling brook cut through the landscape, its crystal clear water bubbling over smooth rocks, adding a gentle soundtrack to our serene surroundings. We pitched our tent, carefully securing the lines to ensure it would remain stable throughout our stay. Once it was set out, we built a fire pit a safe distance away, using rocks we collected from the lake's edge to create a barrier to contain the flames. We gathered firewood and kindling from the forest, taking care not to disturb the delicate ecosystem. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow on the mountains and bathing the lake in a warm, inviting light, we sat down near the fire, ready to enjoy our first night in this remote, beautiful place. The tranquility of the landscape was a balm to our weary souls, and we couldn't wait to explore and familiarize ourselves with this new, uncharted territory. The first day of our camping trip began with the sun gently waking us as it filtered through the trees. We crawled out of our tent, embracing the cool morning air and the fresh smell of the forest. Excited for our first day, we prepared a hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon cooked over the campfire, accompanied by strong hot coffee. After breakfast, we grabbed our fishing gear and headed down to the lake. The water was so clear we could see the fish swimming beneath the surface, and we eagerly cast our lines. As we waited for a bite, we enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere, sharing stories and laughter. The hours seemed to fly by, and by the time we decided to head back to camp, we had caught several good-sized fish for our dinner. Once back at the campsite, we prepared the fish, marinating them with a blend of spices we had brought along. As evening approached, we started a campfire, and the aroma of the grilling fish mingled with the scent of burning wood. We feasted on our catch, reveling in our self-sufficiency and delicious flavors of the meal. After dinner, we sat by the fire, the night sky overhead speckled with countless stars. We talked and reminisced, the warmth of the fire and the camaraderie making us feel completely at ease in our remote haven. The second day dawned, and we eagerly planned a hike through the forest. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and fruit, we fill our backpacks with essentials like water, snacks, and a first aid kit. We ventured onto a well-trodden path that led us deeper into the woods, the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves accompanying our journey. As we hiked, we marveled at the variety of plant life, the vibrant shades of green surrounding us. We encountered a small meandering stream, its water crystal clear and bubbling gently over smooth rocks. We followed the stream for a while, stopping to rest and enjoy the soothing sound of the water. Further along, we discovered a grove of ancient trees, their massive trunks covered in thick, gnarled bark. The air felt heavy with history as we stood in the quiet clearing, imagining the centuries these trees had witnessed. By late afternoon, we returned to our campsite, tired but satisfied with our day of exploration. We decided on a simple dinner of canned chili heated over the fire, followed by gooey s'mores for dessert. As night fell, we listened to the sounds of the forest around us, feeling grateful for the experiences we had shared during our first 2 days in this remote and beautiful place. On the third day of our camping trip, we awoke to the sound of birdsong and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees around us. After our breakfast of pancakes cooked over the campfire, we decided to explore a different part of the forest, hoping to discover more of the natural beauty this remote area had to offer. We filled our backpacks with essentials and set off along a lesser-known trail, the path less defined than the ones we had followed before. The forest grew denser as we ventured deeper, the sunlight filtering through the canopy at narrow beams, casting a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. The air was filled with the sense of moss and damp earth, and the occasional flash of color caught our eye as a butterfly or bird flitted through the underbrush. As we hiked, we chatted and marveled at the scenery until we stumbled upon a small, mysterious clearing. The clearing was ringed with wildflowers, and the grass seemed greener and more vibrant than in the surrounding forest. There was an almost magnetic allure to the place, and Alex was particularly drawn to it, curiosity sparkling in his eyes. "Hey, I'm going to check that out. I'll be right back," Alex said, stepping off the trail and heading toward the clearing. I watched him go, feeling a bit uneasy, but unable to pinpoint why. I decided to wait near the trail, figuring he wouldn't be gone long. I took a seat on a fallen log, taking in the sounds and smells of the forest while I waited for Alex to return. Minutes turned into hours, and I began to worry. I called out Alex's name, my voice echoing through the trees, but there was no response. Deciding that I couldn't wait any longer, I hesitantly ventured into the clearing, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for any sign of my friend. The clearing seemed even more peculiar up close, but there was no trace of Alex. I spent hours calming the surrounding woods, calling his name and looking for any clue that might lead me to him. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, I realized I had no choice but to return to the campsite, hoping against hope that Alex had somehow found his way back there. With a heavy heart, I retraced my steps, following the trail back to our campsite. As I approached the clearing, I spotted a familiar figure sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. Relief washed over me, and I hurried to his side. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice a mix of relief and frustration. "I've been searching for you for hours. I've just got a little lost," Alex replied, his eyes not meeting mine. "I'm sorry." Though I was relieved to have found my friend, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling that had been growing since our separation. As the days went on, I started to notice small changes in Alex that made me question if the person who returned from the clearing was truly my friend. Initially, these changes were subtle, easy to dismiss as the result of fatigue or the stress of getting lost in the forest. The first odd behavior I noticed was Alex's sudden disinterest in our usual conversations. Before we'd talk for hours about anything and everything, but now he seemed distant and disengaged. His responses were brief, and he would often stare off into the distance, as if lost in thought. Next, I observed that Alex had developed an unusual fascination with the wildlife in the area. He would spend hours watching the birds and squirrels, his gaze following their every movement with an intensity I had never seen from him before. It was as if he was studying them, trying to understand their behavior. His appetite had also changed dramatically. Alex, who had always been an adventurous eater, now seemed to have an aversion to the food we had brought with us. He would pick at his meals, eating just enough to sustain himself, but never truly enjoying the food. Perhaps the most unsettling change was his newfound ability to navigate the forest with uncanny ease. Alex would have been directionally challenged for as long as I'd known him. now seemed to have an innate understanding of the area. He would venture off into the woods alone, always returning to the campsite without any difficulty. This was especially unnerving, considering how easily he had become lost just a few days earlier. Finally, I noticed that his sleeping habits had become erratic. He would lie awake in the tent, staring at the roof as if he were waiting for something. Other nights, he would slip out of the tent and disappear into the woods, only to return just before dawn, looking no worse for wear. All of these strange behaviors combined made me increasingly uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened to Alex in that mysterious clearing, and that the person who had returned to our campsite was not the same person who had entered the woods that day. As our camping trip drew to a close and we prepared to return to civilization, I began to dread what might happen once we left this remote and enigmatic place. The car ride back home from the camping trip was a long and silent journey, filled with tension and unease. As we drove away from the remote wilderness, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread, wondering what had truly happened to Alex during our trip. The first clue that something was seriously amiss came when we passed through a small town along the way. We stopped at a diner for lunch, and as we sat down to eat, I noticed Alex's reaction to the other people in the restaurant. He seemed almost startled by their presence, as if he had forgotten what it was like to be around other humans. His behavior grew increasingly odd as we continued our journey. He would stare out the window for long stretches of time, seemingly mesmerized by the passing scenery. At one point, I noticed him absent-mindedly running his fingers over the dashboard, as if he were unfamiliar with the materials and textures of the car. The most alarming incident occurred when we stopped at a gas station to refuel. I went inside to pay and grab some snacks, leaving Alex in the car. When I returned, I found him standing outside the vehicle, staring intently at a stray cat that had wandered near. As I approached, I noticed that Alex seemed to be communicating with the cat in some way. He was making strange, soft noises that I had never heard before, and the cat appeared to be responding, its tail flicking in ears, twitching in a peculiar manner. The scene was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. As we resumed our drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I racked my brain, searching for any explanation for Alex's strange behavior, but nothing made sense. It was as if the person sitting beside me in the car was a complete stranger, wearing the face of my best friend. I couldn't take it anymore, and I finally asked, "Alex, are you okay? You've been acting strange since you disappeared in the woods." He turned to me, his eyes cold and emotionless. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice devoid of warmth. But as he spoke, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. The reflection that should have been my friend's was twisted and distorted like a warped version of him. My heart raced as the realization hit me. Whatever was sitting next to me, whoever had come back from the forest that day, was now my friend. It looked and sounded like Alex, but it was something else entirely. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I tried to decide what to do next. Fear coursing through my veins, and the long road home stretched out before me, filled with fear. Story 2. As the 5 friends continued their road trip, they couldn't help but feel invigorated by the freedom of the open road. Ella, a history buff with a penchant for adventure, eagerly shared stories about the forgotten towns and settlements scattered across the country. Max, the group's free-spirited artist, would often sketch the picturesque landscapes they passed through, while Sarah, the practical and resourceful one, made sure they stayed on track with their itinerary. Jake, the inquisitive engineer, and Chris, the charismatic and kind-hearted musician, provided the group with endless entertainment through their amusing debates about the latest technology and music trends. Each friend brought something unique to the journey, and their camaraderie only grew stronger as they traveled together. One day, as they were passing through a particularly desolate stretch of highway, they noticed their gas gauge nearing empty. Concerned, they began searching for the nearest gas station. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the horizon, they spotted a faded sign pointing to a town called Hollow Grove. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to refuel and find a place to rest for the night. The road to Hollow Grove was narrow and winding, surrounded by dense, ancient trees that seemed to close in on them as they drove further. The atmosphere was unnerving, and the friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something otherworldly. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, a thick fog rolled in, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Despite their unease, the group pressed on, guided only by the dim glow of their headlights. They felt a growing sense of disorientation as the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no sign of the town. Their nerves were frayed, and the air in the car grew heavy with tension. At last, they spotted the decrepit welcome sign for Hollow Grove, nearly obscured by the encroaching forest. As they entered the town, they couldn't help but feel a cold shiver run down their spines. The town appeared to be entirely abandoned, its once propped buildings reduced to crumbling shells. The streets were empty and lifeless, and the only sound that pierced the silence was the distant howl of the wind. As the friends approached Hollow Grove, the forest seemed to close in around them, creating an oppressive atmosphere that weighed heavily on their spirits. The once vibrant colors of the surrounding flora appeared muted, as though the very life had been drained from the landscape. The trees loomed over the road, their gnarled branches casting eerie, twisted shadows that danced in the waning light. As they drew closer, they began to notice the gradual decay that had taken hold of the town. The first signs of abandonment appeared in the form of dilapidated houses on the outskirts. These once charming homes now stood desolate with broken windows, peeling paint, and overgrown yards that hinted at years of neglect. The group's unease grew, but they pressed on, driven by their urgent need for fuel and shelter. Upon entering the town, they found the main street lined with crumbling, abandoned buildings. The remnants of a once thriving community could be seen in the boarded-up storefronts, the rusted lampposts, and the weathered side of the town's forward diner. A thick layer of dust and grime seemed to cover every surface, and the air was heavy with a scent of decay and dampness. Despite the eerie silence that enveloped the town, the friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The wind whispered through the trees and rustled the leaves, creating an unsettling soundtrack to their exploration. The friends continued through the deserted town, passing the lifeless remains of Paula Grove's church, schoolhouse, and post office. Nature had begun to reclaim the town, with ivy snaking its way up the walls of the buildings and tall grass encroaching on the cracked and buckled pavement. As they reached the edge of town, it discovered an old motel, its crumbling sign barely visible through the overgrown foliage. The building itself appeared relatively intact, though the years of abandonment had left it in a state of disrepair. The once vibrant paint had faded to a dull, chipped gray, and the windows were dark and empty like the eyes of a long-dead creature. As the friends approached the abandoned motel, they hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. The building seemed to emit a cold, unwelcoming aura, but they knew they had little choice but to seek shelter for the night. Gathering their courage, they stepped out of their car and slowly made their way towards the motel's entrance. The once glass door of the lobby had long since shattered, leaving a gaping hole through which they could peer into the dark interior. Ella pulled out a flashlight and cautiously lit the group inside. The lobby was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the musty smell of mildew filled the air. Cobwebs stretched across the corners of the room, and the remnants of once vibrant wallpaper clung stubbornly to the walls. Max took a few steps forward and noticed a rusty key rack behind the reception desk. Remarkably, several keys still hung in their designated spots, as if waiting for long-forgotten guests. Sarah suggested they each take a key, hoping that the rooms would provide at least some semblance of comfort in this eerie place. As they ventured down the dimly lit hallway, the floorboards creaked and groaned beneath their footsteps, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Jake noticed that each door they passed for the scars of time, with chipped paint and warped frames. Chris quietly strummed his guitar, attempting to lighten the mood. but the notes seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive silence. Upon reaching their designated rooms, the friends hesitantly unlocked the doors and stepped inside. The rooms were surprisingly intact, though the passage of time had left its mark. The once soft carpets were now matted and faded, and the paint on the walls had started to peel away in large, uneven strips. The furniture was coated in dust and cobwebs, but the beds still held their shape, offering a place to rest their weary heads. As they began to unpack their belongings, Sarah discovered an old newspaper hidden beneath the tattered curtains. The headline read, "Entire town of Hollow Grove vanishes overnight." The friends exchanged nervous glances, sensing that they had stumbled upon a chilling mystery that was connected to the ghostly figures they had seen roaming the town. Throughout the night, the friends took turns keeping watch, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. As they continued their exploration of Hollow Grove the next day, they would come to learn the true extent of the town's tragic past and the supernatural forces that held its former residents captive in an eternal loop. As Nike fell over the abandoned no-tell, an unsettling atmosphere settled in, filling the friends with a growing sense of unease. They agreed to take turns keeping watch while the other tried to sleep, knowing that they couldn't let their guard down in this eerie place. Ella volunteered to take the first wash. As the others settled into their rooms, she positioned herself in the dimly lit hallway, her eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. The wind outside howled, sending shivers down her spine as it rattled the windows and doors. As the night progressed, Ella began to hear faint, unexplained sounds. At first, she dismissed them as the creaks and groans of the old building, but soon the whispers became more distinct. She could almost make out words, as if someone was speaking just beyond her range of hearing. When her shift ended, Ella awoke Max and shared her concerns about the whispers. Max, a skeptic by nature, assured her that it was likely just the wind playing tricks on her mind. As she reluctantly went to her room to rest, Max took up the watch, armed with his sketchbook, to pass the time. As the night wore on, Max found himself growing more anxious. He too began to hear the whispers Ella had mentioned, but he was too proud to admit it. Instead, he focused on sketching the dark, shadowy corners of the motel, capturing the eerie atmosphere that surrounded them. By the time Sarah's turn came, the whispers had grown louder, and she could now make out the ghostly voices of the town's former residents. They spoke of their lives, their dreams, and their regrets, trapped in an endless cycle of despair. Sarah's fear intensified when she noticed faint, spectral figures moving outside the motel's windows. She could see the outlines of Apollo Grove's trapped souls wandering the streets in a perpetual loop, their faces etched with sorrow and longing. As Jake and Chris took their turns keeping watch, they too experienced the whispers and ghostly apparitions. The friends realized that they were not alone in the motel, and that the spirits of Apollo Grove's lost residents were haunting its halls. The first light of dawn filtered through the motel's dusty windows. The friends gathered in the lobby, their sleepless night etched on their weary faces. They knew they had to act quickly to uncover the truth about Hollow Grove, before they too became trapped in its supernatural grasp. Ella, the history buff, suggested they start by searching the town's library for any records or documents that might shed light on the town's past. The group agreed and set out, navigating the eerily quiet streets toward the cities. Upon entering the library, they found it to be in a state of disarray. Books and newspapers lay scattered across the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and mildew. Max and Chris began searching the shelves for any books on local history, while Jake and Sarah sifted through the piles of newspapers, hoping to find clues in old headlines and articles. Ella, meanwhile, discovered a hidden door that led to a small, dusty room filled with old maps, town records, and handwritten journals. As the friends regrouped in the hidden room, they began to piece together the tragic history of Hollow Grove. They fought accounts of the meteor crash that occurred decades ago and the strange energy it emitted, warping time and space. The journals spoke of townspeople who vanished without a trace, leaving their families to mourn their inexplicable loss. As they continued their research, they learned about an ancient ritual that was believed to have the power to break the supernatural loop that held the town captive. The ritual required specific items and incantations, and it had to be performed at the site of the meteor crash. With time running out, the friends decided to split up to gather the necessary items for the ritual. Ella and Max scoured the library for books on the occult and supernatural, searching for the incantations they would need. Sarah and Chris ventured into the nearby forest to collect herbs and plants, while Jake set to work constructing a makeshift altar at the meteor crash site. Throughout the day, the friends worked tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that the spirits of Apollo Grove's lost resonance were depending on them as the sun dipped below the horizon. They regrew to the meteor crash site, armed with the knowledge and tools they needed to perform the ritual. They began the ritual. The ghostly figures they had seen the night before began to gather around them, their faces filled with a mix of hope and fear. The friends knew that their actions could be the key to freeing the trapped souls and breaking the curse that had gripped Hollow Grove for so long. With determination in their hearts, they continued their efforts, knowing that the fate of the town and its lost residents rested in their hands. As the friends stood in a circle around the makeshift altar at the meteor crash site, they felt a palpable energy in the air, their nerves tingling with anticipation. They had each been tasked with a specific role in the ancient ritual, and they knew they had to work together to break the loop that had ensnared Hollow Grove. Ella began by reciting the incantation she had found in the library's hidden room. Her voice wavered at first, but she soon found her strength, her words rising confidently above the wind that whipped around them. The ghostly figures of Hollow Grove's lost residents drew closer, their eyes fixed on the friends as they carried out the ritual. Max carefully arranged the herbs and plants Sarah and Chris had collected in the forest, placing them in a specific pattern that formed a protective barrier around the group. As he lit the herbs, a fragrant smoke began to rise, filling the air with an otherworldly scent that seemed to calm and power the friends. Jake had constructed a makeshift altar using stones from the surrounding area, carefully inscribing symbols he had found in the ancient texts. As the ritual progressed, the symbols began to glow with a soft ethereal light, pulsating in rhythm with Ella's incantations. Sarah and Chris, meanwhile, played a haunting melody on their instruments. The music seemed to resonate with the spirits, creating a powerful connection between the living and the dead. As the melody intertwined with Ella's incantations, the energy at the site intensified, causing the very air to shimmer and vibrate. As the ritual reached its climax, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the center of the circle, momentarily blinding the friends. The meteor itself seemed to resonate with their actions, its unearthly energy surging and pulsing in response to the ritual. The ghostly figures of Hollow Grove's resonance were drawn towards the light, their forms beginning to shimmer and change. As they stepped into the brilliant glow, their once sorrowful expressions were replaced with relief and gratitude. One by one they disappeared into the light, their souls finally free from the loop that had held them captive. As the last of the spirits vanished, the light began to fade, leaving the friends standing in the now quiet clearing. They could feel a shift in the atmosphere, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from the town. Exhausted but triumphant, the friends knew that they had succeeded in breaking the curse that had plagued Hollow Grove for so long. With the knowledge that they had set the lost souls free, the friends returned to the motel to rest before continuing their journey. As they left Hollow Grove the following day, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that they had played a part in restoring balance and peace to the town at its resonance. The experience had bonded them in ways they could never have imagined, and they would carry the memory of Hollow Grove with them for the rest of their lives. The drive out took a few hours. As I pulled off the main highway and onto the branching road, I was struck with the sense that I was going to be very alone out here. I'm an avid hiker, but since many of the hiking trails I'd normally frequent had become almost crowded as of late. For this trip, I'd settled on a trail I'd vaguely heard of, but knew next to nothing about. It'd lead up towards some serious wild territory, with nothing around for hundreds of miles. The land was technically part of one of the nearby national parks, but was only barely mentioned on the park's website. I suspected this was because it was much further out than the regularly visited trails, only accessible from a branching road that pretty much led to nowhere. My plan was to head into the wilderness and camp out overnight under the stars. I live in a desert state. No, I won't tell you which one. And I figured there'd be some stunning views of the constellations in the cloudless sky at night, especially since it was forecast to be a moonless night. I'd already walked the popular day trails in the area, so I was looking into for something a bit farther afield. The plan was to camp out under the stars and head back in the morning. The deserted road suggested I was right in thinking that nobody came this far out. Should be a good chance to relax and get away from it all. Eventually, I reached my destination and pulled off the asphalt of the road and into the gravel of the parking area, tires crunching as I slowed to a stop off to one side. Parking lot would have been too generous a title. It was really just an unsealed area next to the highway with a signpost announcing the entrance to national park territory. The area was almost empty, only a single other car parked up. I got out and stretched, looking around and spotting the low sign that marked the trailhead. As I did, I took a second glance at the other parked car. It looked like it had been there for an age. All 4 tires were flat, although they didn't look to be punctured. Every surface was dusty. I looked back at my car, which was lightly coated from the drive-in, but this was well and truly caked on. There were no broken windows, and it didn't look like it had been stolen and dumped. It didn't look damaged at all. Must have been there a while, I thought to myself, wondering why no one from the park service had had it towed by now. I made a mental note to call them when I got home. I opened the door to my back seat and got out my pack, hat, and rifle. I'd thought hard about whether to bring the rifle. It was extra weight after all, and odds were I wouldn't need it. But last time I'd been out hiking overnight, I'd had a far too close encounter with a coyote that had left me wishing I had something more than rocks to protect myself with. I figured since it was only a small .22 caliber, it wouldn't be too heavy, and I'd packed it into a light soft case that fit alongside my pack. I reached into my pack for my sunscreen and slathered some on my arms and neck before turning off my phone. I'd called my sister before I left town to let her know my plans, and stowing it and my keys away, shouldering my things and setting off up the trail. I'd gone no more than a couple of 100 yards when I slowed to a stop, nose in the air. There was the slightest breeze, but with it came the hint of something behind it. I winced as the warm air hit my face, because the smell it wafted towards me was terrible. "Smells like something died," I muttered to myself. The breeze died down and the smell went with it. "Ugh," I said, setting off again and picking up the pace. I couldn't see any buzzards around, but if there was something dead nearby, I didn't want to be anywhere near it if the wind kicked up again. The hike in was uneventful. I won't bore you with all the details, but it was great terrain, a clear and easy trail through the desert shrubland. Some hours in, I was breathing hard as I reached a slightly hillier bit of the trail. I came to the top of the rise and saw that the terrain flattened out ahead into a wide plateau. Looking at the sun, I saw it was mid-afternoon and decided this was as good a place as any to set up camp for the night. I walked another few minutes before stepping off the trail, spotting a nice flat bit of land where the brush had been cleared away. There were the remnants of a campfire in the center, just a few bits of charcoal and some scorched ground. I nodded to myself, taking off my pack and rifle case and placing them on the ground near the old campfire. I spent over an hour bringing in firewood, and another half-hour breaking it all up into manageable pieces. There was plenty around, lots of low, dead bushes and shrubs around the place. I wanted enough wood for the fire to last easily through the night. The sun was just starting to go down, and it was beginning to get a bit chilly. I stood back and looked at my wood pile. It was quite impressive, and probably way more than I'd actually need. Better safe than sorry, I shrugged to myself. The last rays of daylight were peeking over the horizon as I lit the fire, building it up until it was crackling away merrily. I ate a couple of power bars I'd packed as a cold dinner, swigged some water, and sat on the ground looking up at the stars coming out, feeling very peaceful. That feeling didn't last very long. I heard the wind pick up before I felt it. It whistled between the rocks and shrubs, seeming to whirl around, passing me and then doubling back before arriving. It brought a warmth with it that was odd for the desert at night. That wasn't the only thing it brought, though. I sniffed as the breeze kicked up the flames in my little campfire and screwed up my face. That stench I'd smelled earlier came with it, hot and rotten, like roadkill baking under the sun. I gagged and tried to hold my dinner down. The campfire flared up as the wind hit it, throwing sparks in the air. I watched as they floated into the sky, bright orange spots against the black, almost blending in with the stars. As they burned themselves out, the wind died down, the flames it had kicked up lessening as well. The stench had died back as well. It was still there in the background, but not being blown in my face anymore. Once the light from the flare-up had dimmed, everything seemed a lot darker. I looked around and shivered involuntarily, realizing just how dark it suddenly was. I looked up at the sky and wished I hadn't chosen a moonless night for my hike. Looked back towards the fire and then stopped dead. Something was wrong. I blinked hard and looked up again at the sky. The stars. The stars were gone. 1 second they'd been there, and the next they just weren't anymore, as if the wind had blown them out like they were candles. There was nothing overhead, just a sudden blackness all around, seeming to press in against dome of light that my little campfire was throwing out. "The hell!" I exclaimed, looking about me. The air hadn't changed temperature. It was still cool but not cold, but an icy sense of unease was settling over me. I shivered again and tossed a couple of branches on the fire, then drew my jacket closed and zipped it up. Where before I'd been able to faintly see the outline of the scattered shrubs and boulders by the faint starlight, now I couldn't see a thing. There was no horizon anymore. The suddenly black sky blended in completely with where I knew the mountains in the distance were, and I couldn't see anything in the darkness that was pressing in around me. I grabbed my pack and pulled out my phone, turning it on and quickly navigating to the flashlight app. The phone's flash lit up and cast a harsh light on the ground, and then flickered and died, the phone turning itself off again. I pressed the power button again, but the screen stayed stubbornly black. Shit, I thought to myself, reaching back into my pack for my keys. I found the pen light on my keyring and turned that on, which also immediately flickered and turned off. I whacked it a couple of times to no avail, before giving up in disgust and stowing my keys and phone back in my pack. I looked around me, shivering with unease again. It was very dark. I couldn't see more than 20 feet on either side of the fire. It was almost as if the light was being forced back in on itself. I couldn't hear anything other than the crackle of the campfire. The whistling of the wind had stopped. That god-awful smell was still in the background, though, like there was something dead nearby, and what the hell was that? I heard a noise like someone clearing their throat, a thick, wet "hih." My stomach dropped, my breath catching in my throat for a second. I wasn't alone out here. Looking in the direction the noise had come from, I saw a small flash in the darkness, and then another. A tingle ran up the back of my neck as I realized there was something out there, sitting just outside of the reach of the light from the campfire, watching me. My sister has a little dog, and I remember staying with her once, and it looking at me from a dark room down the hall while I was in the brightly lit lounge. I couldn't see it at all, but I knew it was there from the way the light bounced off its eyes. Dim, yellowy pinpricks in the darkness about a foot off the ground. What I saw was like that. Only instead of the eyes in the dark being knee-height like my sister's dog, these were 6 feet off the ground. Too tall to be a coyote, or even a mountain lion, I thought to myself almost absently, trying to control the fear that was bubbling up inside me. "Yeah! Get out of here!" I yelled, standing and waving my arms in the air. It didn't leave. Instead, the eyes came down a couple of feet, like the thing had lowered its head. I slowly moved to put the campfire between me and it moved in turn. I kept moving around the fire, and it kept moving too. I stopped and stared at it, and it stopped and stared right back. Something else was strange. My feet had crunched the gravel as I turned to face it as it circled, but it made no sound at all as it moved. The darkness hid all but the barest outline, and even that was fuzzy at best. Apart from what I assumed were eyes, all I could see was a slightly darker spot in the blackness. Crouching, I picked up a rock and chucked it in the direction of the eye flashes. The rock sailed through the air, and I lost sight of it in the darkness, but I'd swear my aim was dead on. It didn't hit anything. I just heard a crunch as the rock fell to the gravel and tumbled away. The flashes in the darkness bobbed up and down slightly. Whatever it wasn't afraid of me, and it seemed to be moving closer. Slowly, very slowly, I reached for the rifle case, unzipping it and taking out my little .22. I pulled the bolt up and back and then forward and down again, chambering around. As I did, the thing moved again, the eyes coming back and slightly lower, as if it was coiling back on itself, like a cat ready to pounce. I moved my thumb to disengage the safety, pulling the stock tightly into my shoulder and aiming for where I guessed the thing's center mass would be, a bit more than a foot below where the glint of the eyes were. "Don't make me use this!" I yelled at it again. "Just go away!" I heard a wet sound, like a growl from a dog crunching food in its mouth, and squeezed the trigger. Crack! The sound from my little rifle seemed deafeningly loud, splitting the quiet of the night like lightning splits the sky. I lowered it slightly, peering over the barrel towards the thing. It hadn't moved at all after coiling back. It had stayed right there, ready to pounce, but there was no way I'd missed it, not at this range. Work the bolt back, I frantically thought to myself. Get another round in, re-aim, squeeze the trigger, crack. Work the bolt, aim, squeeze the trigger, crack. Again, crack, again, click. The hammer came down on an empty chamber. My ammunition was spent. I'd only packed the single 5-round magazine, and I had nothing to reload with. I hadn't counted on needing any more than that. The thing shifted slightly, growling again as it moved. The flash from its eyes in the firelight disappeared, and I lost sight of its outline. I lowered my rifle with shaking hands, switching my grip to clutch the still warm barrel like a club, ready to swing the stock into whatever that thing was. Thump! Something solid hit me in the back, and I screamed as I spun on the spot, swinging the rifle like a bat. It whooshed through the air, hitting nothing. I took a step back, breathing hard as I saw that familiar glint in the dark, just beyond the border of where the light from the fire showed. It had gotten behind me in seconds, and I hadn't heard it move at all. But what had hit me, if it hadn't come into the light? I looked down, and lying at my feet was a single hiking boot. I glanced back up towards the thing. It hadn't moved. It was just there watching me. I looked back at the boot, which wasn't in the best shape. The fabric was torn and it was caked in reddish-brown mud. Hang on, I thought, stooping to pick it up. I shifted it closer to the fire for a closer look. Blood. The boot was caked in dried blood. My head swam and a fire tore through my nerves, the back of my neck prickling madly and my skin turning to goose flesh. I found myself on one knee, breathing heavily as I mumbled, "Oh shit, oh shit." I looked back up towards the thing, which still hadn't moved. I stood and screamed at it, "What do you want with me?" It didn't answer. I dropped the boot. I jumped as there was a small pop from one of the branches in the fire, but was suddenly struck by an idea. I moved closer to the fire and spotted a branch that only had one end alight. I pulled it from the blaze and turned to face the thing. It growled again as I held up the branch, which rose to more of a snarl as I threw it towards it. The blazing stick lit up the night as it tumbled through the air towards the thing, and a horrified thrill ran up my spine as I caught a better glimpse of the outline of it, just for a second before it scuttled away from the light. It was huge, big as a bear, but without any of the mass, lean as opposed to bulky. It was dark, so dark that it seemed to flow and blend into the gloom behind it. It had 4 long legs attached to an almost stumpy torso, but it hadn't used all 4 when it moved. It used the front ones, arms, to push itself upright onto the back legs, and then danced madly away on those, while its whole body and arms jerked from side to side. God, it was so tall, maybe 8 feet high when moving on its back legs, and it never seemed to get fully upright. The things that glinted in the firelight did seem to be its eyes, and the split-second glimpse of its face I caught was enough to make me take a step back in horror. It looked almost human? Human but deathly wrong, like if you took a person's face and stretched it forward so it was long, like a horse's head. The mouth, though, it wasn't small like a horse's. It stretched all the way back to where the face met the rest of the skull. The mouth was stuffed full of far too many rotten-looking teeth, stained red in places. I think my legs gave way then. I found myself sitting on the ground, hugging my knees and rocking back and forth. What in the hell was that thing, and what did it want with me? The blood-stained boot didn't exactly fill me with hope that it was friendly. I used a shaking hand to grab some more sticks out of my woodpile and feed the campfire. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't come into the light, and it had moved away when the fire came near it. I gave a silent thanks to whatever urge had made me drag in as much wood as I had. The eyes had stopped moving again, and it seemed the thing was content for the time being just to sit in the dark and stare at me. I stared right back, trying to think of what the hell I was going to do, and we stayed like that for a while, looking at each other. Somewhere not too far away, a coyote howled. The eyes turned and bobbed up and down slightly in the direction of the howl. Was it sniffing the air? It turned back to face me and it grunted. Whatever the noise was, it sounded dissatisfied somehow. The thing turned away again, and I saw the barest smudge of an outline moving off into the dark towards the howls. Within seconds, it was gone from sight, and as it faded from view, so did its stench. I sat there, frozen for a moment, and then burst upwards, boots scrabbling for grip on the loose gravel as I came to my feet. I frantically grabbed at my pack and swung it onto one shoulder, stooped to pick up my rifle and swung that by its strap onto the other shoulder, and then hesitated, torn by indecision. Dare I risk it? I clenched my jaw and tried to swallow down the rising sense of fear. I picked up one foot and took a single step away from the fire, wincing as the gravel crunched underfoot, which seemed deafeningly loud in the silence that was broken only otherwise by the fire. I peered around, muscles tensing with anticipation, but saw no sign of the thing. I took another step. The gravel crunched again, still no sign of it. I relaxed ever so slightly, took a deep breath, and started briskly walking towards the trail. Once I hit it, I could turn right, and I was confident enough I could follow it back to the parking lot, even in the dark. I'd taken no more than a half-dozen hurried steps when I stopped dead, frozen in place. I could smell it again, the reek bringing the bile up in my throat. Heart racing, I turned my head slightly to the left and saw that glint in the dark. The light from the fire had dimmed as I'd moved away from it, but I was still just close enough for me to see that familiar reflection of the flames in its eyes again. A rumble came out of the darkness, a growl. I slid my front foot backwards, slowly moving back towards the fire, never taking my eyes off where it seemed to be in the dark. I reached the fireside and slid my pack and rifle off my shoulders, laying them on the ground and sitting down next to them. As I did, I heard the coyote howl again. The thing seemed to grunt, and then it faded into the darkness as it turned away from me. What the hell was I going to do? It was like the thing was playing with me, but I wasn't going to risk making a run for it again. No way did I want it to catch me in the dark. The darkness had seemed to kill my phone and flashlight when it settled in, and any flaming torch from the fire I took would burn out well before I made it back to my car. I still had my lighter, but there was no way that'd make enough of a difference to keep it away. The coyote began to howl once more, but the howl cut off quickly, turning into a snarl. I listened closely as the snarls became pained and then desperate yelps, and held my breath as they cut off, replaced by the sounds of something snapping, crunching, and splattering. I breathed deeply, listening as I tried to slow my hammering heart down. Nothing. Once again, all I could hear was the crackling of the fire. I shut my eyes, listening harder, and shrieked as something hit the ground next to me, scrabbling backwards on my butt away from it, waiting for it to leap up and grab me. I'd gotten a few yards away when I stopped scrabbling and just sat there hyperventilating, staring at the ruined pile of gray fur and red gore that lay in front of me. It was the coyote. Or what was left of the coyote. It was a mess. It looked like every bone in its body had been pulverized and its front legs were completely missing, but raggedly missing, like they'd been torn away rather than cleanly cut or bitten off. Worst of all, its head was facing the wrong way, twisted around until it was entirely backwards. Blood seeped from the open mouth, collecting into drops that each hit the dusty gravel with a soft splat. I shuddered and hugged my knees tight, rocking back and forth slightly. This must have been the coyote I'd heard howl earlier, the one the thing went after. Oh shit! I stood. Where was it now? I circled on the spot, looking out into the dark. There, on the other side of the fire, just beyond the border where the light ended, that familiar reflective yellow double flash. It was still watching me. "Fuck you!" I screamed at it. I strode to the dead coyote, grabbed it by its still warm tail, and swung it around, casting it away from the fire towards the thing. It flumped to the ground, not too far away from where the light ended. The thing didn't move. I fought to get my breathing under control, kicking dust over the small patch of blood that had pooled where the coyote lay. I looked at my hands, and they were sticky with blood too. I grabbed my water and rinsed the worst of it off, wiping my hands on my pants to dry them. I heard a grunt and turned to see one long, impossibly thin limb reaching in from the shadow to grab the dead coyote by the tail, slowly dragging it out of the light. It was hard to see any detail. It was almost as if it was radiating the darkness out from itself, but I could see that it seemed to end in a hand that again looked human, but wrong. The fingers were way too long, and they were jointed in too many places. It looked like someone reaching out with a collection of tarantula legs on the end of a stick. It made a pained sort of sound while it was doing it. Maybe the light heard it? The coyote disappeared from view, leaving bloody drag marks in the dust, and I heard horrific ripping and squelching sounds. I guess the thing was tearing it apart and eating it. The eating noises eventually stopped, and the thing grunted, but it sounded unsatisfied somehow. It went back to staring at me. Whatever this thing was, it wanted me, not just the coyote. I picked up some more branches and built up the fire, then sat down and stared at the reflective eyes in the dark. I don't know how long I sat like that for. It must have been hours. I built up the fire a couple more times and went back to staring at the thing. It'd grunt or growl every now and again, but then it shut up. For the time being, it seemed satisfied just to sit and stare. Eventually, I found my blinks getting longer. Each time it was harder to open my eyes again. God, I was so tired. The adrenaline spike had long since worn off and I felt wiped out. Just a second. I'll just close my eyes for a second, I thought to myself, as my head began to nod forward. I jerked bolt upright and wide awake at the thrill that ran up my spine as I heard a wet, throaty "heh" from behind me. I'd fallen asleep. The fire had burned down low and was mostly just embers, only emitting a faint glow, just enough for me to see that the thing had crept much closer as the light had diminished. I must have dozed off for an hour or more. Leaping to my feet, I grabbed some branches from the pile and hurled them into the remnants of the fire, and then fell to my hands and knees so I could frantically blow into the embers, desperately trying to stir them back into life. The light flared up as they caught alight, and I saw it sitting there, way too close, squatted on its haunches like a dog sitting, long back legs folded up so what I assumed were knees were up by the shape of its head, and arms extended down to the ground in front of it, holding its torso upright. The light glinted from its eyes as it shifted its head to stare at me again, and it hissed as it pushed itself backwards, retreating from the light. As I lost sight of it in the darkness, I heard that wet sound again, like a long tongue smacking against lips. I shuddered. I'd gotten a better look at its eyes in the light this time. They were filled with hunger and pain, but there was an intelligence there. Human eyes, not entirely those of an animal. It went back to looking at me, only this time it wasn't silent. It kept growling and grunting, and the noises it was making grew in volume and frequency. It almost sounded desperate. It circled the fire, eyes disappearing from view, and then reappearing elsewhere where it'd growl from the dark. But it never came into the firelight. I didn't say anything. I just fed the fire and hoped that my stock of firewood would hold out a little longer. I'd brought a lot in, but it was diminishing by this point. Then, finally, the thing made a noise I hadn't heard yet, a hiss higher in pitch than anything else it had made, and it looked up at the sky before staring at me once more. It made a disgusted sort of noise, and then turned away. I heard the wind kick up, and I could smell the thing's stench again, and then all of a sudden it was just gone. As the thing went, the smell and the suffocating darkness went with it, and I realized I could see clearly around me again. The sky had that deep, dark blue color you see before sunrise, and I could see a few pinpricks of light that could only have been stars. It got progressively lighter and lighter until there. The sun peeked up over the horizon, and I'd never been as happy to see the light of day as I was now. I waited another hour and a half until the sun was well in the sky and things were starting to heat up before I dared to make a move. I picked up my things and got the hell out of there, shuddering as I passed the remnants of the coyote, just a bloody patch of gray fur and shattered bones. I jogged the whole time, never pausing, never stopping, and never looking behind me. Every time I slowed, I'd hear the wind whistle again, and I'd catch a whiff of something foul, so I'd pick up the pace again. Hours later, I was just about ready to drop when, there, the start of the trail. I could see down to the car park. Without stopping my jog, I reached back and pulled my backpack off, holding it in one hand and awkwardly cradling the gun case in my other arm as I scrabbled in the pack for my car keys. I almost tripped as the hard trail gave way to the gravel of the car park, but managed to keep my footing as I scrabbled towards the car. I fumbled with the keys for what seemed an age before throwing open the door, tossing my things across, and slinging myself into the driver's seat, both hands gripping the wheel with a white-knuckle grip. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and was taken aback at the haggard, wild-eyed figure that stared back at me. There were rivers of clear skin in the dust caking my face. I realized I'd been sobbing with relief since I'd been able to see the end of the trail. I looked back out at where the trail started and saw the dust from the path swirl as the wind picked up once more. I hurriedly rammed the keys into the ignition. I gunned the engine, throwing the car into gear, pulling around quickly and peeling out onto the road. As I sped back towards the city, it wasn't until I hit the main highway before my heart stopped pounding and my breathing slowed to normal levels. A few hours later, less time than it took to drive out there, I was not doing the speed limit. I was home, with my doors locked and the sunlight streaming in through the windows. My phone turned on after I'd plugged it in. Now you work. So I messaged my sister so she wouldn't call search and rescue. A day or so later, I called the Park Service and told them that I'd been stalked by some mountain lions on the trail, and they removed the area from the information section of their website. Nobody really went there anyway, they said. I didn't mention the abandoned car or the bloody boot, and didn't tell anyone what had really happened. And after all, who would have believed me if I did? There was no point in sending anyone else into danger. Later, I started reading up on some local folklore, but stopped pretty quickly. I came across something that made me start to shake at the description of it. I'm fairly sure I now know what the thing was, but I decided I wouldn't look any more into it, and I'd just try to put it all out of my head. It hasn't really worked. My breath catches in my throat every time I go into a dark room while I fumble around for a light switch. I don't hike much anymore. If I do go hiking, then it's strictly along well-used trails, and I never ever do an overnighter. I had work transfer me to a branch a long, long way away from the desert. I couldn't deal with feeling a hot wind anymore. I'm somewhere where it snows now. My encounter left me with a lot of unanswered questions, but one question ranks above all the rest, and it's something I'm not really sure I want to know the answer to. If that thing I read about is real, then what else is real and hiding out there in the dark?